It's a real treat to welcome Chris Reich back to the Poison Pen and talk about a terrific thriller. You guys are in for a real treat with this first, I understand, in a new series.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to talk about with this book, a lot going on. Can you kind of, I don't know, maybe just start off by giving us the basic setup of the book?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for coming. It's always fun. You know, it's great to be here in January, where I could walk, or walk around the block without being drenched in sweat. For some reason, so many of my books used to be released in July or August, and I would be staying at the Hotel Valley Ho, and it's like, okay, we're gonna make the dash, go! It's that 2 blocks. It would be like 116 degrees a couple times, and you go up and down the street, and there was like not a soul here. I think everyone had left for the summer that was smart. I remember once I have some friends here, and we were in Switzerland, and we were talking about how hot it was, and it made the newspaper, the Herald Tribune. We're in Zurich, and it says 115 in Phoenix, and the tires are melting on the asphalt. And we said, cheers, we like Switzerland. That's good. So yes, I'm here to talk about my new book. It's called The Take, and it's starring a new series hero called Simon Risk. And Simon Risk is something called a private spy. And it's kind of easy all of a sudden these days to describe what a private spy is, because there's a very famous one in the news these days. And his name is Christopher Steele. And Christopher Steele is a private spy, and one of his colleagues, who I really wouldn't doubt knows him, was the inspiration for this book. And I met this man about 8 years ago. I was in London doing research for one of my books, and I knew I needed to meet someone from the law enforcement community. So, is this even working?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you can hear me anyway. So I had done, one of the good things about writing books is often you get asked to do different things than write books, and I got an offer to write this story about the Secret Service for Parade magazine. Parade's that little insert we all get on Sunday newspapers, at least the 3 or 4 people that still get newspapers. Yay, newspapers! All right, that's fine. And anyhow, so I'd written this article about the Secret Service, and the head of the Secret Service, Mark Sullivan, was very friendly, and it was, of course, a nice article about the Secret Service. And he called me up and said, Chris, thanks for writing this. By the way, hi James, is there anything, that's my friend Dr. James Lyons, who I went to the University of Texas with, prominent Scottsdale resident, former Hellraiser. Current Hellraiser. Anyway, so I said, yes, there is something you could help me with. I have this idea for this new book, but I need to meet someone in British intelligence. He goes, I know just the guy. He's formerly one of the deputy directors of MI5, which is the British Security Service, and luckily, he now works in private industry. And I said, well, why luckily? He says, well, if he was still at MI5, he wouldn't ever even talk to you. So I got this address at this, where he worked at this private consulting firm. It was in London, on Bond Street, which is the ritziest part of London, where all the art galleries are. I called him up. I said, well, how can I find you? He said, well, it's quite a small location. We're just behind this door, and there's a number there. It's between a beautiful art gallery and an absolutely dreadful rug merchant. And of course, it was a beautiful art gallery, but the rug salesman was beautiful Persian rugs. I guess he didn't like them. So I walk in, and I find the number. It was like a really strong steel door. The numbers were very small in there. It was pretty obvious from the first that he didn't want. They weren't advertising. Okay, their name was not on the door. But so I rang the buzzer. It opened. I went inside, and there was another steel door right in front of me. And then I rang, and it went in. And so obviously they were like pretty concerned about who was actually visiting their shop. And so I went upstairs, and they had a beautiful office, very steel gray carpets, like very kind of metallic, very modern, expensive furniture. And it was hardly anybody was in there. It was very quiet. And all of a sudden, this tall gentleman comes walking to me, straight out of Central Casting, 6'3" tall, gray hair, like James Bond, if he survives to the age of 63, right? He goes, oh, Chris, so happy to meet you. My name's Brian. He goes, by the way, that's not my real name, but it'll do. and so we started talking, and I said, well, I have a lot of questions. I'm writing this book. I want to know basically. And I said, well, what do you do? He goes, well, I collect information. I said, well, what kind? He goes, I collect everything. And I said, who do you work for? He goes, well, I can't really tell you, but I work for politicians and political parties and large corporations, who want to find out information about people they don't like. So I thought, wow, if I write a book in the future, that's such a neat character, and this guy was such an impressive person. And I'll tell you one thing, I never really talk politics, but I will say this, that I can guarantee you that 99% of whatever's in that dossier is true, or as close to true as this guy can get, as he believes, because these guys don't traffic. They can't afford to be writing nonsense. If anything they say comes back to them, they're out of a job. And these guys make a lot of money. They charge very high fees, and their word is kind of their currency. So whatever's in that, he makes a call. He calls his friends. The man I met had worked for 30 years at MI5, and cops, they all know each other across countries. There's international brotherhoods of this and that. And so he calls his friends in Moscow or in London or wherever, and gets the inside skinny. And I'm sure that he asked somebody else. So it's good that I could now reference my spy, Simon Risk, by first bringing up Christopher Steele. But Simon Risk, of course, is a lot rougher around the edges. He was an American, but he was sent over to London with his father. The parents were divorced earlier. His father was an investment advisor who turns out to be kind of a con man and took his own life when young Simon was just 10. So Simon was sent to live off with his mother in the south of France in Marseille. And I didn't know, and I don't know if you know this, but Marseille is like the toughest town in the world. I mean, basically the organized criminals there are so brazen that they have often, at least once or twice a month, they take down these armored cars where they just basically surround the armored car with machine guns and just let loose on it, and the police just stay away and say, okay, whenever you're finished, we'll take a look at the car. And I used to live in Europe, and I remember seeing once on the French version of 60 Minutes a story about Marseille and about these criminals. So I thought, my gosh, that's a good place. That's a good place to put a character, having to imagine growing up on the streets there. So this young character, Simon Risk, lives from when he's 10 to 19 in Marseille, and sadly, or nicely for the book, he goes to the wrong side of the tracks and starts joining in on these people who rob these trucks, and ends up doing a little stint in prison. And then when he comes out, he decides to become a good guy. And of course, we meet him then 10 years afterwards, where he's now devoting his life to using that special set of skills that he picked up on the wrong side of the tracks to do good. And that's where we start off the tape.
And he's the ultimate Renaissance man. I mean, his cover operation is he restores really high-end vintage Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and he speaks like 5 languages. There's a wonderful scene, and this is the kind of book where we can't give away too much, but the book opens with this beautifully choreographed heist that takes place. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think to talk about the beginning of the book, the bigger question is, people often ask thriller writers, or all writers, where do you get your ideas for your books? And especially for thriller writers, often our stories are so outlandish and so kind of over the top, they go, how can you even think about that? And in fact, part of the reason that I started writing this book and this series, which is much more grounded in kind of true crime, and not this kind of, the world's going to explode and there's a nuclear bomb, but, finding bad criminals and bringing them to justice, is because, in truth, real life was just getting ahead of me. I mean, there was so much stuff that we're seeing that was real that I couldn't even think of. It's like, now what am I supposed to do, And so when I started this story, I was visiting in Europe when there was, on the front page of the news, the story about a robbery, a daring daylight robbery of a Saudi prince. And I read the details, and it says the Saudi prince was staying at a very nice hotel in Paris, and he was waiting to go to the airport with his family, in his convoy of 16 BMWs. So I thought, well, that doesn't stick out too much. 16 black BMWs parked in front of a hotel, with a bunch of bodyguards, and somehow these criminals were so well versed in their trade, and obviously it was somewhat of an inside job. They followed this convoy of 16 BMWs. They waited till the prince got in with his family, and of course he's a good husband. He has 3 wives and 15 children, and but I guess he was known to always travel with huge amounts of cash. He never traveled anywhere without suitcases full of at least 1 to 2 million euros in cash. And I guess word got out. And anyhow, so this guy was going to the airport, and the criminals struck one block before he was about to get on the freeway and kind of home free, they surrounded the motorcade with 6 cars, jumped out, all in black and all with the hoods and machine guns, and went right, without firing a shot, they went right to the car. They knew where he was in, broke the window, got him out of there. They found the money, took the money, and it was all over in 60 seconds, And obviously it was such a great story, and it was like from a motion picture that it was on the news. So I said, I have to put that into my book. And like any thriller, though, the bad guys weren't just after the money. Money is boring. They were after something else much more valuable. Something that the prince definitely did not want to give up. And that's where the story begins.
A certain document.
Certain
we can
document,
say.
right.
That's about all we can say about it, really. And the guy who orchestrates this heist is a member of the Corsican Mob, Tino Caluzzi?
Tino Caluzzi, exactly.
Yeah.
Tino Caluzzi.
Tell us a little
He's
bit
real
about the Corsican Mob.
Well, it came in from, the fun part about doing these jobs is being able to, without someone looking over your shoulder, spend like 8 hours looking at YouTube, and I was like, oh, what are you wasting your time on the internet for? And then finally just getting on planes and being able to travel and go to these places. And so when I started looking into Marseille and all the crime the rampant crime, Marseille is the second biggest city in France, and it's the poorest city in France. So it's a beautiful city right on the Mediterranean, of course. It's a beautiful port, and right off the coast of Marseille are 2 prisons called the Chateau d'If, which is where the Count of Monte Cristo was put in the story by Alexander Dumas. And I work some of that myth into my book. But yeah, so it's a beautiful scenic city that happens to have some of the most violent criminals in the world, and a lot of those criminals are in gangs. And the Corsicans are the ones that run the gangs there. Like in America, it's the Sicilians, they have the Corsicans. So that's how I brought them into play.
Right, and there's quite an Arab population in Marseille as well.
Well, they got, a lot of the Arabs came across right from Tunisia and Algeria, and the French have a word for them, les pieds noirs, the black shoes. They've come over since, the 40s, 50s. France used to control Algeria, and there was a big war there in the late 50s, early 60s, and then Algeria gained its independence. But you could walk in Marseille when I was there. You start at the coast, and you're looking at these beautiful, 150-foot yachts, and within 10-minute walk, straight up the street, the main street there, you're in almost like a souk, where it's only men and they're wearing their white robes. You don't see any women. The radios are playing their music, whatever music. And you feel and smell. You smell the lamb cooking, and you don't think you're in France anymore. That's for sure.
Right. Now, you mentioned a little bit about Simon's backstory. He found his father committed suicide, which you alluded to, and there's a darkness behind him. He seems tormented by this, as anyone would be. And what kind of drives Simon? I mean, there's a lot of different things going on with this character. He's not just the James Bond, kind of super.
No, I tried that. He's definitely not James Bond at all. I mean, James Bond is so fictitious, and what I like about the new James Bond movies, they try to make him a lot more realistic. I love that. So I say he's in the vein of a more realistic. He's a person that was given a second chance in life and is very aware of having gotten a second chance. And he's kind of like, an alcoholic who never quite accepted his disease. In other words, he's always thinking, maybe it might be okay to go back and live that life again. So that criminal life that he lived for a while and actually enjoyed before he got shot several times and spent 4 years in prison and 2 years in solitary confinement, he still has that itching him saying, I was really good at this, and maybe if I try it again, I could be even better. And so that's what's fun about him. And the book opens up, you see right away his skill set, and the first chapter is with this heist in Paris, but the second is where we meet Simon Risk, and he's on a job himself, and he's attending a very fancy car auction, the Sotheby's annual car auction in London. And he's there not about cars, but to get something else back. And that something else is a very, very expensive wristwatch that was stolen. And he's been employed by Lloyd's of London, a famous insurance agency, to get back a wristwatch. And the fun part is, how do you get back a wristwatch that's on somebody else's wrist in the middle of the most expensive car auction in the world?
Talk loud.
Just kill the mics and talk loud.
Kill mics, talk loud.
All right.
Harder for me probably than you, but
Yeah.
I will try. And so anyway, the kind of the heart of the book, or the secret document that he's alluding to, a lot of different parties around the world are very anxious to get their hands on this document, including the Russians, the Russian mob, and just in general. And boy, I'm trying to think how I can get into talking about this document without giving too much away. But
I could just say that it's a historical document. It's a letter, and like I said, how do you get your ideas? So I get my ideas from reading newspapers, from talking to people. This letter, it was something I just came across. It's like, I think it was on my Facebook feed once. This one little picture from some kind of, wasn't a conspiracy website, but anyway, what got me going was a picture I saw that was taken by a photographer named Pete Souza, who was Obama's photographer for 8 years. But go back 30 years, he was also Ronald Reagan's photographer, okay? And he used to travel with Ronald Reagan everywhere. And he traveled with Ronald Reagan also to the Soviet Union. And when he was there, he took a certain picture. And I don't want to talk about what the picture is, but there's a picture that when you look at it will start making you think, what if? And I took that picture and I said, what if? Actually, what if? What could be really behind this picture? And so that's where the story, that's kind of the genesis. That's how you put all these crazy pieces together.
And then you've got this ultimate badass female assassin kind of spy that sort of squares off against Simon.
Right.
And what kind of research do you have to do in, in making these kind of scenes believable? I mean, there's some really wonderful action sequences, and but you've done those in a lot of your books before. How do you get those details right?
Try and fail. The funny part, I think Elmore Leonard said, easy reading means hard writing. So when you read like an action sequence or something that you're not there, those take the longest because you're sitting there going, what would happen this and that, and then not this and that. And so you're trying to just map it out, choreograph it, and somehow, envisage it in your mind as you're going. So I had one in my book, Rules of Deception. There was a great scene where the hero is in a car and he puts his car on a train that goes through the tunnel in Switzerland. Well, I used to live in Switzerland, and once I put my car on this train to go through this 25-mile tunnel, and you're on this rickety train, and there's cars right in front of you and behind you, and once you get in this tunnel, it is pitch black. I mean, this is darker than anything. I thought, recalling that, I thought this would be a great place for a chase or something scary to happen. And that book was being developed for a movie for 4 years at Paramount Pictures. And the movie producer, a guy named Lorenzo de Bonaventura, goes, Chris, he goes, I bought this book just because I want to film this sequence in this tunnel. And so you get your ideas in crazy places. Like I said, the first action sequence in this book is that heist, but there's many more. And the hardest one to choreograph in this book is the last 30 pages, which is the climax where everyone comes together. It's almost, you could almost write it as a farce where every bad guy who wants this document shows up at a certain place, and they're all hell-bent on getting it, right? And so that is the hardest. It's like making a watch tick properly, where each cog has to go tick, 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 and of course keeping it very serious and suspenseful.
Right. Now, as far as the kind of the global scene with intelligence, what's going on today, that changes so fast. One of the most interesting programs I thought we ever had here was when we had Stella Remington, who was the former head of MI5 or MI6.
MI6. She was the head of the spy service.
And she's written some thrillers of her own. But she came in. We had a small crowd, and smaller than this, or probably 10 people. And here's the woman. She walks in, former head of MI6. Who's probably public enemy #1 on the IRA list for years, and no bodyguard, no nothing that I could see. But she was fascinating, talking about how the whole intelligence game has changed. After 9/11, everything changed. and the Russians were kind of on the back burner for a while, but now not so much. They're back on the forefront. Do you have a lot of sources besides just the usual news sources?
I have news sources. I have several friends that used to work in the Secret Service that I'm really close with, that are buddies, and so they help me with like domestic stuff. I've kind of learned over the years how things work in the spy world, and of course it's much more mundane than you ever really think. These are ordinary people with husbands and wives and families, and they're not out there usually shooting people. That's for sure. Who is a really interesting person is another author, is Valerie Plame, who was the lady that was outed by the Reagans, and she's been here, Bob, right?
Yep.
And I've sat on a couple of book panels with her, and she was a real covert operative. She was trying to get nuclear information, and she was definitely in some scary places, basically because she didn't know who was following her, and she would meet people, and her job was to find out who might be interested in buying like fission material, like stuff to make uranium. And so she'd go to these conferences and pose as a scientist herself, and then take someone over to the side and say, by the way, can we have a special talk, maybe talk, and sooner or later she'd have to figure out if they would be helpful or not, and then she'd say, by the way, I really work for the U.S. government, and we'd like you to work for us too. And of course that's the moment of truth when you really recruit somebody. But meeting her and hearing that story, I could really sense that she'd been in some very scary situations, because you don't know who the other person is. And you talk about Russia being, Russia rising. Their embassy in London is twice the size it was at the height of the Cold War. They have 800 people working in their embassy, and you can't follow all of them. And what's scary, what's so amazing, is just the ability to collect information now and listen to everybody's phones. And everyone has to. We've just finished building this giant facility in Utah for the National Security Agency, and it's this big building. It's out in the open. Everyone knows about it. And their stated goal is to collect every single email that's sent in the world every day. All of our emails are always in there. And they say that's a great invasion of privacy. And my book prior to this, Invasion of Privacy, was about that. And they say, don't worry, we collect the mail, but it's okay for us to collect it. It's only an invasion of privacy if we actually look at it. And to look at it, we have to have these court documents and stuff. But the point is, it's there. And they have these giant vacuum cleaners that just suck everything up, they put in these, machines or devices that they tap into the undersea cables that transmit all the internet traffic, and they get it all. And, there's that movie Snowden, about Edward Snowden, is fantastic. It is so interesting, and you only have to get an idea of how big this is when they have a scene where they're in Hawaii, and they're showing how big the NSA, and they've taken over like an underground crater, which is, the size of 10 football fields inside a volcano, and they go into this thing, and there must be like 3,000 people walking around. It's like, holy Christ, it's a real thing. It really exists, and that's only one of the things we have. So just think how sophisticated, Snowden, all that information is already 10 years old. My God.
It's like a 1950s sci-fi movie, but it's real.
Did you see that?
No, I haven't seen it.
Definitely worth seeing. It's very, very interesting.
Well, let's back up and tell us just some basics. You had a very interesting life yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You were born in Japan, I read.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about your background. You went into finance.
Sure. And it's so funny. Everyone always likes talking about themselves. And before I share about myself, I remember one time I was going to the FBI to interview actually the number 2 guy, Thomas Fuentes, who's the deputy director for foreign operations of the FBI. And just to get in, you have to jump through all manner of hoop, besides providing your social security number and stuff like that. When I got there, you're met by like a PR representative for the FBI, and as you get up the stairs, then you're met by the assistant. So by the time I walked into his office, I had like 3 people with me just to make sure I could get into this office. And the whole time they were saying, Chris, you only have 50, the director can only give you 15 minutes of his time. He's very busy. They make you feel really scared. So by the time I walked into the office, there's Director Fuentes coming in, a big, tall guy, 6'3", and in his big blue suit. He goes, Chris, nice to meet you. He goes, I understand you have some questions. He goes, well, I have a few minutes. What would you like to talk about? I said, well, actually, I'm really interested in you and I want to hear about your whole career, how you got to where you are. He looks at his assistants, he goes, clear my agenda. I'm going to be speaking to Mr. Reich for a while. And I was there at like 5:30. So, it's fun to talk about yourself, but I'll just keep it brief. I was born in Japan. My father was Swiss, Willy Wolfgang Reich. You practically have to stand up and click your heels when I just say his name. and he lived up to that name. He was that kind of guy. And but he was in the travel business in Japan. I think he moved in 1959. So he was one of the people responsible for bringing over all the Japanese tourists with their Kodak cameras and their buses, snapping pictures, right? But I was then born in Japan in 1961 and then came back to the States in 65. I grew up primarily in West Los Angeles. And then I went to college at Georgetown University. Yay, Hoyas. And it's funny, so, when I went to Georgetown, I loved history. But my father said, I'm not paying this just for you to study history. I want a real degree. So I had to study, I studied economics. And so I got like all C's in economics and all A's in history. So I did get my B average, just barely. But I remember the hardest class I took, and the one I did worst in, was a class called Financial and Securities Markets, which is like how to be a stockbroker, right? And so, of course, I got a D in that class. A D, okay? I think that's barely passing. And so, of course, my first job upon graduating was to be a stockbroker. and so I did that for about 2 years, and finally one of my clients said, Chris, he goes, you're a nice young man. He goes, you tell some funny jokes. He goes, but you really have no idea what you're doing being a stockbroker. He goes, I have a friend of mine named George Kosmetsky, who's head of the University of Texas Business School. I suggest you give him a call. So all of a sudden, 8 weeks later, there I was. I took my tests, and there I was in Austin, Texas, going to business school. And for once, I got serious, and I studied very hard, and I graduated after 2 years at the top of my class. And I was one of the few people to get like the coveted interviews at Goldman Sachs and First Boston. Okay. Unfortunately, I got the interview in fall of 1987, and I flew up to Wall Street to have my interview, and I remember walking down the beautiful offices in First Boston, red carpets, and they have these very expensive models of old sailing ships, the Bonham Richard, the USS Constitution, and I'm walking through going, which should be my office, the one with the view on the Hudson River or the East River, and dreaming of my salary of, they were starting salaries back then of $85,000 plus $5,000 moving allowance, $2,000 for clothing. So I'm like rubbing, going, this is going to be it, this is it. We sat down, he goes, Chris, he goes, thank you for coming here. We're so happy you flew all the way up to see us. He goes, but we have no intention of hiring you. It was 5 days after the crash on Wall Street in 1987. Oh. 5 days, the market had lost 25% of its value. And he goes, we're just going to stick with Harvard, Stanford, Northwestern, and Wharton. He goes, any questions? So luckily I had a backup plan, and that backup plan was to go work at the Union Bank of Switzerland in Geneva. And instead of getting that $80,000 salary, $85,000, I was going to get $30,000, salary in the most expensive city in the world, Geneva, right? There's only like a few cities more expensive than New York. They're like Geneva, Tokyo, and maybe Stockholm. Anyhow, so there I was, and of course, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was the best thing that ever happened to me going to that town. And my first job there at the Union Bank of Switzerland, which was the biggest bank in the country, was working as an assistant in the private wealth, the wealth management division. Okay, and the second day on the job, all the portfolio managers were gathered together to go listen to a member of the United States Drug Enforcement Administration who was in town. And he was in town, this was, I remind you, February of 1988. He was in town then to track down the money that had been stolen from the Philippines by the Marcos family. And luckily, he put his money in Credit Suisse and not UBS, because if it was in our bank, we never would have talked to him. But he was there to convince the people to give the money back. And so on his off time, he was going to speak to us bankers about the kind of things that we should be looking out for, the kind of activities that constituted, that might indicate that the money we were getting was of illegal or dirty provenance. He goes, what you have to look out for, as bankers, are people just walking in off the street, with bags of money, just wanting to deposit without giving you their name. He goes, what you have to look out for are some of your clients wiring money in and out of the bank very quickly, often in the same day? And the room got very quiet, because that was like our bread and butter. And the meeting ended, and the head of the bank went over to him and practically hugged him and said, "Oh, I'm so happy that you came." He goes, "On behalf of the Union de Banque Suisse," he goes, "we pledge our cooperation. You could count on us to be at the forefront of this battle against, illegal money laundering." And everyone claps, and we all went back to our offices, and our offices were in this the bank there, the head of the bank, the headquarters there, in this old, 4-story stone building, and go back to get smaller and smaller offices. So we were in this little pod of like 5 managers, and the second we got there, the head goes, "Meeting," our little vice president, little French guy. So we all gathered, "Go, come," he sits down, he goes, "Oh," he kind of reiterated what the head of the bank had said. He goes, "We have to keep our eye out." He goes, "If you ever see this, we really must keep a sharp eye." He goes, "But if anyone ever even thinks about talking to that American agent, you're fired." So I thought, if I ever write a book, I have to put that in the book. That's on page 75 of Numbered Account. So that's about it for my interesting background. I did leave the bank after 3 years, and I went then into the watch business, and I ran a watch company. I started and ran a watch company for 5 years. And I like to say I was in banking, I was in watches. The only thing I missed out in Switzerland was the chocolate business. So it was like the Holy Trinity.
But that really exposed you, I'm sure, to this whole other strata of society that most of us mere mortals wouldn't see.
It was
how
fun.
they operate.
And it was, first of all, it's true. I mean, I would sit, my first job at UBS was to be what they call like an officer of the day, where I would just sit downstairs and wait for those people to walk in with money. And they did, 2 or 3 people every day.
Would you get them coming in with a big sack?
No, I didn't get those, but it's amazing. The richest people are the most poorly dressed. You'll sit there and you'll see this little, kind of drab man and his wife walk in, like he's not wearing a London Fog trench coat, he's wearing something off the rack, and they sit down there, they look kind of like life has beaten them down. Then his wife opens her purse and she dumps out $300,000, and over again, or Swiss francs or dollars or French francs or whatever. And then I would say, "Thank you for this," and I said, "Here's some forms to fill out." And this was in the day when you didn't even have to have a passport. You didn't have to show any identification. Just give me any name, and you make it up. "Would you like us to send you the mail?" "No, we're happy to keep it at the bank. Here's your code name. Here's what you have to, how to identify yourself." Then I would take the money, go to the counting room, put it in the machine. A lady would do the counting. She'd write the receipt and go back and say, "Okay." And so I was exposed to this whole area, and we had the business that my first clients, were all from the Middle East. So we had back then several of our clients with $2 to $3 billion. Back then that was a lot of money. Right? That's not a lot of money anymore. There's a lot of people with $2 or $3 billion. Back then it was a big deal. And I remember the first day I got there was 2 desks empty. 2 of the senior portfolio managers. And one of them, to this day I don't know what happened to him, but he'd had a nervous breakdown from working with a client. And he was famous because he used to always go visit the clients at their fancy places. He'd be up in San Moritz at the thing and gone for a week. But something about this guy's job, he had a nervous breakdown, never came back again. And so I was wondering, what happened to him? And that's when I remember one of my bosses literally looking and says, "Don't ask any questions."
So your writer's antenna or
Yeah,
something.
I thought that was interesting. Honestly, with my people, I didn't really see anything. The accounts were already established, and you're like saying, where do you want your money? 10% has to be in gold, and they'd give us. You get as a portfolio manager in Switzerland, you get a list of like 10 different kinds of stocks, like high risk, medium risk, and you sit there and look, "Okay, I think I'll put in, what looks good for the day," and you choose yourself what kind of stock. So it was pretty mundane.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Before I open it up to questions, what the obvious one is, where are you going to take Simon next?
Well, the next one, it's so good because like I said, the fun part about this job is getting to travel for it. So I have a hankering to go to Monte Carlo. I heard there's a really nice casino there. In fact, the next book opens up in the casino of Monte Carlo. And Simon is very good. He's a thief. He's a pickpocket. And he was a card cheat. He knows how to spot cheats. And I didn't know. So I started researching. I wanted to start the book in Monaco. I didn't know how sophisticated cheating is these days. I started reading about these teams of cheats they get to go to Las Vegas, And the people that do this the most are these Vietnamese mobs. They caught a couple that go in, and they got one that's stolen $45 million from Baccarat, from playing. And they have teams of 4 people that go in. So one guy plays, he wears glasses, and he has an earpiece in the glasses. Somebody else is walking around with a camera so they could see, as hidden camera, so they could see the cards that the dealer gets. There's a guy in the toilet with a laptop computer that is sitting there getting the information and putting the cards in. Immediately, he gets them, he feeds it into some kind of program that will then tell the guy who's playing the odds of what he should be betting. This is all real time happening. And they're so good at it that they didn't get caught till they got $45 million from the Bellagio Hotel. That is sophisticated thieves. And I thought, I got to put that in the beginning of this book. You know, that's what Simon's after. He gets sent to Monte Carlo to track these people down. And the timing is perfect because he's going to Monaco right when they're having a big international boat show. I was there once for a boat show, and it was the most outlandish thing I'd ever seen. So they have a beautiful harbor in Monte Carlo, right? Big, famous harbor. And usually, if you have a nice boat, pretty much anybody could put their boats there, if you're rich. But at the boat show, it gets even snobbier. They only allow boats that are bigger than 150 feet to be moored there. So you're seeing a big harbor that's full of, like, every yacht is 200 or 300 or 400 feet. It's spectacular.
Helicopters
and of course,
on them.
Helicopters on them. And of course, because all the owners are then in town, I mean, every car you see is a Ferrari, a BMW, and in fact, a lot of the companies like Mercedes and BMW sends their salespeople down, and they send fleets of their newest cars there just to drive around so people could see them. It's a spectacle like no other. And then to get on the more exciting side, the most beautiful Russian hookers in the world are there en masse. I mean, you've never seen women like this. I mean, it's like, wow, wow, wow. And they're unmarried. They're available. And so I went there once with my brother. My older brother works for, I'm not going to give his name, but he works for the biggest private mall developer in the United States. We went to high school together, and this mall developer was in the market of buying a yacht, so he was there to look at these yachts. And so we were going down to having a cocktail party on this yacht and that yacht, and I thought, this is so awesome, I got to figure out to put this in one of my books. And since Simon does renovate Ferraris, that's his day job, is he renovates Ferraris. And ladies and gentlemen, we have all made a big mistake in putting any money ever into the stock market. We should have been buying Ferraris forever, because these cars have skyrocketed in value so much that we could have bought a car for $400,000, 1995, that's now worth $30 million. Wow. So it's just crazy. I have a friend that's a friend of the family, a friend I know from where I live, that he started as a simple auto mechanic for Volvo in Boston in 1975. And he started working his way up, worked for Mercedes, and then by just pure luck started learning how to deal with Ferraris. And now this guy, he's 60 years old, he has a Gulfstream G3 jet, he has the biggest Ferrari renovation operation on the West Coast, and he flies around the world helping other people, among them many Saudi princes and that, buy these cars. And what a great business. So it's all in the new book.
Did you have to bone up on car mechanics?
I did. I spent time at this guy's dealership, and he was telling me how they fix the cars, and how much money it costs, and how it takes 2 years to restore a Ferrari, and it's just, I love it. I mean, I am hooked. I love those cars. They are like pieces of art, and I can completely understand how mostly men, just go berserk and fall in love with them. I really do.
Now, finally, have you sold the film rights to the take yet?
I have not, and they're available, so Patrick, we should talk afterwards.
Let's open it up to some questions. I'm sure you have them. Okay?
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to the new character, but are we gonna ever get to see from Jonathan Ransom again?
This is the business. There's a business side to book publishing, and those first couple did really well, and that third book didn't do well. And I'm halfway through that fourth book, and it's really good. They said, Chris, try to write something else. Why don't you write like a financial thriller again? So I wrote The Prince of Risk, and then got sidetracked. So there is a chance. I might, and if I do it, I might just do it and publish it like as an ebook, which is fine, I hope, for you, and do it that way.
Right on. Thank you.
But I dig those characters.
Yeah, they're some of my favorite books.
Oh, thank you.
For sure.
And I use that. It's funny because I wrote that Emma Ransom is like in my rules series. She's a woman that works for Doctors Without Borders with her husband, Jonathan Ransom. And the whole thing is you think she's with her husband just helping him, go around the world, minister to the poor, but she's there for a different reason. She's not there just to be a good girl. She's a very bad person. And it's so funny, there's a movie about to come out called Red Sparrow, which looks really good. And I know he got that idea from my books, because she is what they call a nightingale. The real academy is called the Nightingale School, where they take the Russian women and they teach them how to be spies. But Red Sparrow, which is a fantastic book by Jason Matthews, and Jason Matthews was with the CIA running, I think, the Moscow office for like 20 years, so he knows a lot more than me. So that's a great book, and the movie looks good. Looks semi-realistic, so it may be in the future for Jonathan and Emma.
Thank you.
Yes?
Did you happen to see 60 Minutes the other night?
With who? Was it about that?
No, it was Cornwall, I think was his name.
Oh yeah, of course.
Who is Le Carre.
Yes.
And he said that when he's finished a book, he's depressed. Does that do it to you? That affect you?
I am. So she's talking about David Cornwell. That's the real name of John Le Carre, who is my favorite writer of all time.
Yeah.
And I did see that. And actually, I'm not really depressed. Usually, when I'm finished with a book, I'm happy. It's like, thank God, it's done. Because when you write a book, I think John Irving had a good saying. Says anybody could write a book, but only an author can rewrite a book, because that's where it's hard. And you write it, and then by the end you're rewriting and going over, and you have to really knuckle down and concentrate on what you're doing. So by the time you're done, it's like, get it out of here, you're really happy to see it gone. So, but I have a funny story about John Le Carre. So, everyone know John Le Carre is the world's most famous spy novelist, in my opinion, a master of literature, and he was just a superstar writer. And so when I was starting my career as a writer, yes?
He was on 60 Minutes this past Sunday.
Yes, I saw that, but thank you. And so he was on 60 Minutes. Anyway, so I used to live in Zurich, and first let me preface it. As I was writing my first book, which was called Numbered Account, which was about my time working in a Swiss bank, every night I would go take a walk after dinner and listen to books on tape. I love books on tape. And my favorite author, John Le Carre, reads his own books on tape. And he's a fantastic reader. He's like a fantastic actor, and he's just the best. So I'd listen to all of his books on tape. The point is, I know what his voice sounds like, okay? So I was in Zurich, in Numbered Account. My first book had come out, and it was a really big success. And I was feeling all on top of myself, Mr. Big Shot, and I'm staying at the Hotel Dolder Grand in Zurich, which is a very nice hotel. And if you ever read the book, The Night Manager by John Le Carre, he calls that hotel the Meister Palace. But it's the Dolder Grand, and he always loves going to the Dolder Grand, because my dad was in the travel business, and one of his best friends was the manager of the Dolder Grand for 20 years. And he used to say, when he heard that I was becoming a writer, he said, tell Chris that John Le Carre, David Cornwell, is always in here with Alec Guinness. They're best friends, and they travel, and they always stay here. So fast forward to December of 1999, when I'm there with my family, my wife and my daughter, Noelle, who was like 2. My wife is pregnant. And I'm at the front desk asking to have my car pulled around. And I hear this voice in the background say, "Oh, do you have a copy of the London Times?" And it's the voice. And I can hear it in my earphones. And I almost had a heart attack. Because the way teenage girls feel about the Beatles in 1962 is the way I felt about John Le Carre. And I'm turning, and there he is. It's like he's right there. David Cornwell. And so to my credit, I did not go tackle him or hug him. I wrote a note saying, "Dear Mr. Cornwell, my name is Christopher Reich. I'm an author, and my first book came out, and I'm happy to give you to send a paperback copy up to your room." So I waited left, and I gave it to the front desk, and I let him go. I was brought up nicely. And
So you handed it to him?
no, I gave it to the front desk, so they delivered it to his room. Okay, they delivered it to his room. And so about an hour later, knock, 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 I get a note, handwritten note. "Dear Mr. Reich," I have this still. "Of course I know who you are. And I know he's lying this, but he says, "I read Numbered Account with great interest. would you care to join my wife and I for a cocktail this evening? And so we go downstairs, and this guy's the nicest guy in the world, and one of the great storytellers of all time. And he's the kind of person where he has great stories about being a spy and about being a famous author, which are actually much funnier. And he sat there, and for 2 hours, told us stories and paid the bill. He loved that, paid the bill. And then we had breakfast with him the next day, too. Wow. And I think I posted recently a picture I have of us, with my daughter and him, and I'm smiling like a blithering idiot with David Cornwell. So I love him, and he's just a great guy.
This gentleman had a question.
Only the title of your follow-up book to this? Do you have it decided?
I do not. And it's funny how you get titles. I had written this book, and it was finished, and I had first, this is the first in the series, and he's just a great character. These books are like, I got so sick of these big giant world thrillers where the bomb's going off. This, I said, forget it. I want a really cool guy you follow around, kind of like a Cary Grant in It Takes It to Catch a Thief, but with more hair on his chest, a little bit more masculine, So that's what Simon Risk is. He speaks languages. Chicks dig him. He's tough as nails. He has scars all over, but he's a good guy. And he's a gentleman, and he likes it. And he's funny, So he's just a fun character you want to spend time with. So I thought I'd name the character, each book like about where the book took place. So I wanted to name this the Paris Caper or the Paris something. But I'd given the book to my publisher, to my editor, and it goes up. And then the head of Little Brown is a guy named Michael Peach. He goes, "I love this book." And he goes, "And I have a title for it. We're going to call it The Take." So The Take, I go, well, to me it sounded a little bit generic. But this guy loved that title so much. It's like, that's a great title, Michael. So I know I have Little Brown all behind me.
So do you have a working title?
I don't know. The next one opens up in the casino in Monte Carlo. So then it has to do with something going on in the Middle East too. And there's a character kind of from Blackwater involved. That character, Eric Prince, that runs Blackwater, is a very interesting person. His sister is Betsy DeVos, who's our Secretary of Education. And they're all really rich, and Blackwater has become a billionaire from that. And I personally am very pro-mercenary. They provide a very needed service for us, right? But he's trained, he put like 3,000 people to form a small army just for the emir of Dubai. So he wanted his own little army. So he has like 3,000 Blackwater troops that are there all the time that are like his army. And so I thought, that's really neat. What would those guys really be up to? So the new book kind of is about that a little bit too.
Wow.
So it's fun.
That's great. Anybody else?
Well, I'm happy to sign books.
Yeah,
I hope you buy it. I hope you like it. I guarantee you that you will like reading this book. It is fast and furious.
And for a treat. Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight. Let's give them a nice